can't spare any medicine? Absolutely ridiculous. I'll take whatever supplies I need. Thank you very much.
Florence quickly glanced over her shoulder at the long hallway leading to the hospital's supply room. It was dark and quiet. She assumed the commander was in his quarters, sound asleep. But she couldn't be sure. Breaking the lock off the door had been a little louder than she'd expected.
There we go.
She tucked her hammer into her apron pocket and gave it a little pat as a silent thank you for a job well done. Then she opened the door. Florence lifted her lamp from the floor and peered into the supply room. She couldn't believe it when the commander had refused to give her access to the army's medical supplies. There were thousands of injured soldiers here, and they needed her help. Florence stuffed her satchel with medicines and bandages and shut the door on her way out. Holding her lamp high, she made her way back towards the patient wings. She doubted she'd run into anyone. The hospital staff went to bed each night and only came back in the morning. But illness and injuries never rest, and neither did Florence. These patients needed assistance at all hours, and she was determined to help as many of them as she could. Neither a grumpy army commander nor a lock on a door were going to keep Florence from doing her job. And doing it well. She had lives to save. I'm Sarah Kempton, and this is Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, a fairy tale podcast about the real-life rebel women who inspire us. On this episode, Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. Florence Nightingale was born on May 12, 1820, in Italy. Her parents named her Florence after the beautiful city she was born in. Florence's family was very wealthy and had a large estate in England with ivy-covered bricks and fountained gardens. Her parents were travelling through Europe on a 2-year-long honeymoon when Florence and her big sister, Parthenope, were born. When they returned to England, Florence began a life of curiosity and education. Her father believed Florence and Parthenope should be educated, though few girls were in those days. He would sit with them for hours, teaching history, math, literature, philosophy, and multiple languages. Florence loved to learn. She enjoyed organising her notes and observations while she studied, writing in neat rows and carefully stacking her papers. It felt satisfying when everything was arranged just right. Florence learned a lot from her mother too. As important as an education was, her mother believed that teaching her daughters to care for others, especially those who were less fortunate than themselves, was equally important. She would often take the girls into the local village to help people who were struggling or sick. Florence liked how it felt to have a purpose, to be useful, and she found she was very good at taking care of people, and animals too. There were many animals on her family's estate, and Florence enjoyed them all. Ponies, birds, cats and dogs. Once, she found a sweet little sheepdog named Cap who had hurt his paw. She dedicated herself to caring for him. She cleaned and bandaged his leg, gave him fresh water and food, and kept a close eye on him until he was completely healed. She felt so happy watching him run again, and knew that she could heal other creatures too. Florence felt a strong calling to help people. By the time she was 16 years old, she knew she wanted to become a nurse. But when she told her family about her plans, they were furious. Even Parthenope, who was her closest friend, thought her sister's idea was ridiculous. At the time, taking care of sick people wasn't seen as a respectable career. In fact, it seemed dangerous. Doctors didn't really understand germs or how they spread. Nurses didn't have much training, and they weren't paid very well. Most nurses were women from lower classes, servants, the very poor, or women who worked for the church, such as nuns. Girls as wealthy as Florence weren't expected to work at all. Florence's parents wanted her to get married, have children, manage her home, and live an easy life. Her parents decided she should spend time travelling around Europe the way they had on their honeymoon. They hoped if she saw more of the world, she might outgrow her silly ideas. But Florence was stubborn and determined. She travelled like her parents wanted her to. She sailed the Nile River in Egypt, visited the Colosseum in Rome, and toured the Acropolis in Greece. Everywhere she went, Florence found signs that deepened her desire to become a nurse. She visited local hospitals and learned how different cultures handled healing. And, of course, she found more animals who needed her care. While Florence was touring the Acropolis in Greece, she noticed a group of kids huddled together, laughing and poking at something with sticks. She heard them yell, "Owl!" and flew into action. She wasn't going to stand by and let the kids torment a harmless little bird. "Leave it alone right now," she ordered in her bossiest voice. The kids dropped the baby bird and ran off. Florence moved closer to get a better look. The owl was tiny, her feathers all ruffled, and she didn't look like she could fly. Florence worried the owl wouldn't survive if she left her there on the ground. So she picked the baby bird up and slipped her into her dress pocket. She would take care of her, at least until she could survive on her own. After just a few days, the little owl had learned to sleep on Florence's lap and eat from her fingers. She especially loved to ride around in Florence's pocket. Florence named the owl Athena and took her home with her to England, along with 2 tortoises, which she named Mr. and Mrs. Hill, and a cicada she called Plato. Florence practiced her healing and caregiver skills on all of her new pets, and each of them thrived in return. After her travels, Florence decided it was time to start her career, no matter what her parents thought. She was an adult now, and she was determined to decide her own future. Florence started to volunteer at different hospitals. She read all of the medical books she could find and learned as much as she could about properly caring for patients. When she was 31, Florence travelled to Germany to learn formal nursing skills. She spent around 4 months training at the Kaiserswerth Institute, one of the only nursing schools in all of Europe. She loved every minute of it. When she returned to England in 1853, she took her first real position as the superintendent at a small hospital in London. Florence threw herself into the job, managing supplies, tracking the hospital's budget, making sure the nurses actually knew how to do their jobs, and making sure every inch of the hospital was thoroughly cleaned. Florence believed good hygiene and cleanliness was extremely important for healing. That might seem obvious to us today, but doctors at the time still didn't understand how infections spread, and didn't think keeping things clean was all that important. Very quickly, the hospital improved, and Florence earned a reputation for being a skilled organizer and an excellent leader. She was just the kind of person who was always looking for ways to improve the systems around her. And she was already changing lives as she did it. In 1854, England and France were fighting the Russian Empire in a battle called the Crimean War. England's Secretary of War, who happened to be a close friend of Florence, asked her to organise a team of nurses to work at an army hospital. Thousands of soldiers had been injured and were being treated at an army base in Scutari, a city in Istanbul, nearly 1,800 miles from London. Florence was told that the doctors in Scutari were overwhelmed and desperately needed help. Florence immediately agreed. She gathered a team of 38 nurses and they left for Scutari just a few days later. She expected to find a hospital similar to the one she'd left in London and assumed that she and her team would be welcomed and put to work right away. But the army doctors were used to doing things their way, and they didn't think a bunch of women would be able to offer much help. To make matters worse, the hospital wasn't really a hospital at all. It was an old army housing facility, and the conditions were terrible. The entire place was filthy. No one had fresh water or clean bedding, and the army commander refused to give Florence and her nurses access to any of their supplies. How could they treat patients without any tools? Fortunately, Florence had a hammer. After she broke into the supply room, she decided she was going to run things her way, no matter who complained. She immediately set her team to work cleaning, while she distributed supplies and managed ordering and restocking what was desperately needed. She ordered clean towels and sheets and made sure her patients had fresh water and healthy food. On top of that, Florence and her team treated the wounded soldiers with kindness and compassion. Florence never let a night go by without checking on her patients, making her rounds by lamplight. Within 6 months of Florence's arrival at Scutari, something amazing happened. The number of soldiers who survived their illnesses and injuries had more than tripled, and Florence was just getting started. Florence returned to London in 1856 when the Crimean War ended. Newspapers and magazines wrote stories about the lady with the lamp, celebrating Florence for her hard work and all of the lives she'd helped save. Queen Victoria herself thanked Florence and awarded her a grant of £250,000. Florence used those funds to start the Nightingale School of Nursing, based in her home city of London. She knew how important it was for nurses to get easy access to high-quality training. She also spent many years organising and studying her records from Scutari. She was determined to figure out exactly which factors had helped more patients survive, so she could use that information to improve nursing care and hospital policies around the world. Florence put all of her data together into a detailed report. With so much information to sift through, Florence wanted her report to be easy to read and understand. She created a new way to illustrate the outcomes, using visual diagrams and graphs. She'd always been good at organising information, and she put that skill to use too. Through research and observation, Florence was able to prove that hospitals with better hygiene had much higher rates of success. So many highly trained male doctors had missed it, but it was as clear to Florence as could be. Word spread like wildfire about hospital sanitisation, and Florence's work soon changed the lives of patients around the world. Florence hadn't set out to make history. She simply followed her calling to help people, despite her family's doubts and society's rejection. The work was physically tiring, gruesome, and emotionally draining, but Florence never wavered. As she gained respect in the medical community, the stereotypes about nursing changed, and more women began to join the field. The nurses who graduated from Florence's school shared her ideas all around the world, bringing better care to hospitals everywhere. And she didn't stop at teaching. Florence wrote several books on nursing and put together hundreds of reports on medical statistics. Her writing wasn't just for doctors and nurses either. Her most famous book, Notes on Nursing, which is still in print today, was written for anyone who might be caring for someone sick or hurt. Florence Nightingale forever changed the reputation of nursing and improved the quality of healthcare for generations to come. Her legacy shines as bright as the lamp she carried on her nightly rounds, caring for the wounded, uplifting her fellow women, and changing the world of medicine forever. This podcast is a production of Rebel Girls. It's based on the book series Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. This episode was narrated by me, Sarah Kempton. It was produced and directed by Haley Dapkus, with sound design and mixing by Mumble Media. The story was written by Emily McMahon Wattez and edited by Haley Dapkus. Fact-checking by Lauren Brown West-Rosenthal. Our executive producers were Anjelika and Jess Wolfe. Original theme music was composed and performed by Electra Barjocki. A special thanks to the whole Rebel Girls team who make this podcast possible. Until next time, stay Rebel.